Oh, dearie, dearie me. The media is not noted for its scientific accuracy. In fact, the media tends to present things that are biased towards selling newspapers, getting viewers, and they'll often misrepresent information just for its sensationalistic value and then not actually retract their incorrect science afterwards. So I thought, well, everybody's talking about how vaping is killing everybody and there's 450 people are really ill right now with lung problems and 5 people have died. Let's look at the facts of what's actually happening, because it's not vaping liquid that is actually doing that. It's specific chemicals that are being vaped that are causing the problems. So let's start with what's in standard vaping fluid. Glycerin. This is glycerin, also called glycerol, sometimes called glycerine with an E at the end, used to make icing soft, used in cakes. It's used as a humectant because it's sticky, it's sweet, it absorbs water. If I take this lid off, it will actually, and I just leave it off, it will actually get heavy over time and the liquid level will go higher because it absorbs a lot of water. It's very, very water soluble. How to use this medicine? Because this is sold as medicine. You can buy this glycerin in the UK from a place called Boots. It's one of our biggest chemist chains. How to use this medicine? Check this capsule is not broken, blah, 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 blah. To relieve coughs and sore throats, mix the recommended amount, little water, and drink slowly. And they say 2 5ml teaspoons taken 3 or 4 times a day. And the only downside of this stuff, I think it might act as a laxative. Let's taste it. I'll tell you what it tastes like. So here's some. Oh, it's sickly sweet. It tastes like artificial sweetener, actually. Very, very sweet. As is propylene glycol. Now, propylene glycol is the other chemical commonly used in vape e-liquid. On a typical vaping device like this, it's a 50-50 mix. It's half glycerine, half propylene glycol. In a cloud chasing device like this, it's more likely to be 80% glycerin because it's thick and 20% propylene glycol. And the propylene glycol has a couple of functions. It's not very good at producing a vapour on its own. This pen is filled with just propylene glycol. Watch this. It produces a fine mist of vapour, but the main thing that it does is it carries flavour very well. I think that's partly why they use it. I think it's partly also to dilute the fact that the glycerin on its own would just simply not wick into the wick in these things. If you use glycerin on its own, it would probably just sort of not wick in to the point that you'd breathe it in, it would be burning on the wick, which isn't that great and is not a very pleasant experience anyway. The other thing that you find in e-liquid is flavourings, and to be honest, oh dear, flavourings. I'll put a big question mark, because if you look at bottles of e-liquid, it says glycerin, propylene glycol, flavourings, and then nicotine. And it doesn't tell you what the flavour chemicals are. And this is an area of prime suspect for the future, because it's a very controversial area as well. The flavourings are unknown chemicals and, they could cause allergies, they could cause problems, particularly the quantity they're being used in. This is an area I shall cover later in the video. The other thing that's usually contained is nicotine, and you think, well, nicotine's got a terrible reputation. It's very addictive. It's one of the most addictive drugs in the world. But other than that, it's used in absolutely tiny quantities, which is just as well, because if you got actual nicotine, pure nicotine rubbed in your hands, it would not end very well. It's used as an insecticide. Used to be used as an insecticide. They're kind of clamping down that now. But it's a natural plant extract that was used to defend from insects, and it just so happens to give humans hits. It stimulates them, and it's used in tiny quantities, and there is no evidence that breathing it in a water base like this is harmful. Now, the whole water thing, there is water in this. There is always going to be water. That it's so hygroscopic. And what actually happens, the way it works, is that you've got your wick and you've got a little heating element wound around it. The liquid is heated up, and because the boiling point of glycerin and propylene glycol and the nicotine, they're much higher than water. What actually happens is the water basically boils off, and because it's mixed in at a sort of molecular level with the liquid, it atomizes the liquid. It forms little bubbles on the surface. The glycol that hasn't boiled yet on the outside, the bubbles go pop, and you're left with tiny little droplets. And if you were to look at those droplets really close to the microscope, it would be little lenses of glycol just floating in the air. And the glycerin is the bit that actually produces the thick fog. And what you're looking at is basically tiny little droplets, just like a real fog, where it would be droplets of water in the air. In this case, it's droplets of glycerin floating in the air. And that's, because of the way they interact with the light, it creates that fogging effect. I could demonstrate that. This device is filled with a 80% glycerin, 20% propylene glycol, absolutely no flavouring whatsoever, and no nicotine. I'll show you the fog, and I'll also tell you what it tastes like, just pure raw liquid. Very, very thick fog that lingers for a very long time. That's the visual effect people are looking for. That's the glycerin, and it tastes sweet, but slight, I would say almost musty. Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the early nightclubs and the fog machines from 50 years ago, because that's how long fog machines have been about. And the irony there is that that's what was used in them. Glycerin and propylene glycol and triethylene glycol and butylene glycol, various glycols. The one that's not used, well, there's probably others not used, is ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze, so you don't want to get involved in that. And that is one of the things. You always buy your e-liquid from known good sources that specialise in e-liquid, because then you're getting sort of medical grade, food grade chemicals, and they're not going to give you anything hopefully bad. Now, the things you'll not find in e-liquid are oil or resin or wax or tocopherol acetate, otherwise known as vitamin E acetate. But here is the problem. The people who have been getting ill have been smoking cannabis extracts. They've been smoking something called THC, which stands for tetrahydrocannabinol. And it is a lipid. It's a oily, waxy thing. It doesn't mix with water, which means that they can't just add it. I mean, if it would have been perfect, if it had been a completely safe water-soluble thing, it would have been mixed in with this absolutely no problem. But it doesn't. It's an oil. And if you mix oil with this, you'll just get a slurry. So they use solvents and they use concoctions, and they basically engineered an oily substance that people are using in vaping devices, and they've been breathing in oily smoke. And that is where the problem arises, because the most likely cause of all these health problems that have been reported incorrectly by the press is lipid pneumonia, which is what you get when you breathe in oils. And it's also possibly an allergic reaction or a defensive reaction of the lung that's caused it to swell up. Ultimately, lipid pneumonia is the most likely suspect. And the answer here is that unlike the media, which is saying everybody must stop vaping immediately, that's going to drive people back to cigarettes. And the problem here is that the Federal Drugs Administration, they've come along with the correct advice, and they've said, avoid vaping cannabis oils, which is absolutely correct at the moment. The Centre for Disease Control took a bit of a more of a knee-jerk reaction, and they said stop vaping anything, because they just took a knee-jerk reaction at the beginning because they didn't know what was happening. There are some people that say they didn't vape cannabis and they stilled the problem, but there's a very good chance that they did vape cannabis and it was illegal in their state and they just didn't want to say it. A bit like people going to hospital with cucumbers up their rectums and saying they fell in it in the kitchen and it popped up their ass. Yes, indeed. But the main thing I want to say here is that I regard vaping at this present time, there's no known evidence that it's harmful, and it's infinitely superior to smoking. If you're giving up smoking by using devices like even the blue, which comes from the actual tobacco industry, and is probably got an engineered liquid with the nicotine salts to make it extra addictive, I kind of approve of that, because if it's going to get you off actual smoking, it's going to stop you being one of those 480,000 people who die every single year just in America from smoking-related illnesses. And that includes the 41,000 non-smokers that die from just breathing in the particulates and the tars and all the chemicals from traditional cigarettes. Traditional cigarettes are a terrible idea. So ultimately, I would say, if you're giving up cigarettes, yeah, vaping's good. What I'm not keen on is the fact the flavourings issue, and this is quite a big issue because the flavourings have gone from being tobacco flavour or menthol flavour, traditional cigarette flavours that kids would like smoke them or vape them, should I say, and they would go, ugh, they're horrible because they're not actually terribly nice. And they've gone to strawberry candy sherbet, fluffy candy floss, cotton candy peanut explosion, and suddenly all these candy flavours are out there and the kids are going, yeah. Oh, strawberries. And that's not good because that's encouraging kids to start vaping. And if they vape the liquid with the nicotine, it's a new generation of effectively nicotine addicts. It's still a million times better than those kids smoking cigarettes, which many of them would have done. This is something that is just, not being pointed out, that vaping is still replacing cigarettes, and that's good. But I'm all for the states that are saying, we want the flavourings cut back. And I wouldn't go so far as to say remove all the flavourings completely. I would say go back to the traditional flavours like tobacco and the menthol flavours, not the sweet candy flavours. And that's for a multiple of reasons. It's the fact that we don't know what the chemicals are in the flavourings. It's the fact that it's not going to encourage kids because they're going to vape it. And they're going to get that lovely fogging effect. I like the fog effect. That's the only reason I occasionally vape. Not all the time. I just like to occasionally blow out big clouds of smoke. That is one of the problems, isn't it? I never saw it going in this direction when the first electronic cigarettes were introduced. But I digress. Flavourings are the issue. By reducing the amount of flavourings, they're going to reduce the risk of harm from the flavouring chemicals, and they're going to reduce the number of kids that are taking this up. So what can you do? Well, if you like vaping, or if you do like I do, you kind of like the sort of, I must admit I quite like the flavours, although ultimately the strength of them, it smells like air freshener, it's that strong, which must be bad for you. But you can get base liquid. You can go online, hold on, I had a listing. I had an eBay listing in the UK. That's not the eBay listing I was looking for. That's chemical listings for bare chemicals for making your own stuff. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I'm so organised here. This one is Classico 1 litre 80-20 glycerine monopropylene glycol, which is the other name for propylene glycol blend. And basically speaking, it's just a base. It's 1 litre of base e-liquid with no flavourings at all and food grade ingredients, and it's only about £15 including shipping. This is not an advert for this company. It's just the first listing that came up when I was looking for it on eBay. And if you get that, you'll get pretty much what I've got in here, which is actually stuff I mix myself using this Boots glycerin and some commercially bought food grade propylene glycol. And it is, it's just the bare essential vaping stuff. And as I say, it's water soluble. There's a history of the fog machines being used in nightclubs to quite high levels without adverse health problems. There's a history in the past of glycols being used to haze the air in hospitals to prevent cross-infection. The only complaints they got back then was it was a bit drying because it is hygroscopic, and also the haze. They didn't like the actual haze in the air because it was like being in a nightclub all the time. There's also a historic evidence of a research that was done a long time ago, and this isn't something that's just been added by the e-cig industry. This is something that right at the very beginning, when e-cigs first appeared, I went all over the internet. I was just Googling everything, looking for all the information I could find on it. And I found that research which showed that monkeys had been put into an environment with all their foliage and stuff like that, but it had been hazed to a high level with glycol because they wanted to see if it had adverse health conditions for in use in the sort of air sterilisation. And the only point they found they had problems when they were hazing the monkey room was when they raised it to such a high density that it was causing the drying effects, and it caused drying of the monkey's skin. But afterwards, they took the monkeys out and they cut them open, which I don't approve of that. I don't approve of cutting monkeys open. But they looked at their lungs and there was no signs of any damage. So all the hype that the media is jumping on at every opportunity about how vaping is killing people is just that, it's hype. What is having effect at the moment is the people who are vaping these weird, unknown concoctions of oils, waxes, resins and solvents to try and get the sort of cannabis hit, and that's where the problems are lying. So if you do vape, if you're using vaping to give up cigarettes, then good. I hope you manage to give up the cigarettes. If you're vaping just because you like big clouds, then consider vaping just the base flavourless stuff and nicotineless stuff, because you don't want to get addicted to nicotine. That's like playing into the cigarette industry. But the other option is to get the base liquid and get your favourite liquid, your favourite flavours that are super potent and powerful, and just put a few drops of them in to dilute it completely so it's a very low flavour concentration, so you still get your flavour but not at that excessive level. You'll still get your fog, the flavour will still be there, but it won't just be that extreme in-your-face chemical flavour hit. So that's it. That's what I've got to say. I hope that redresses the balance and tells you, that the media is maybe misrepresenting things here and what's happening. If you do smoke cannabis, maybe better going back to smoking it or eating it in cookie form at the moment, because vaping it appears to be a no-no until they find a water-soluble version that can be mixed into this relatively safely. But that's not been done yet, to the best of my knowledge. So, well, we'll see what happens in the future. But right now, don't stop vaping.